So, yeah. Oh, and Macy. If you don't know Macy Chadwick, I am thrilled that she is with us. She is with In Cahoots Press and Residency. We have had her visit Hamilton with the Shift Lab artist group that she's a part of. They are all a fabulous group of ladies, and we cannot wait till you can return to Hamilton. I know that. But I will hand it over. You're out in Petaluma, California, and tell us more. So welcome, Macy, and thank you for joining us.
Cool, thanks for having me. It's so exciting to be here. I'm not gonna be able to multitask and read the chat at the same time. So Steph, tell me if there's like a question or something up on there.
I will keep it up.
Really distracted by that. So I won't be looking at the chat. But yeah, feel free to interrupt me. That I have a PowerPoint just because I don't have the right bandwidth on my computer to like wander around the studio. So I just sort of made photographs of stuff to show you, but yeah, feel free to jump in with questions at any point. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody hear me okay as well? Yeah, good with me, okay? All right. Okay, so I'm starting with this image that actually Steph dug up from my Instagram, which is so funny. So this is an image, Erin Fong is an artist who came and used a lot of the wood type in my shop, and I just snapped this image while she was working back there. It says have a hang, so it's a good place to start. So what I've been working on, so I'm going to show you a few things about what I've been working on recently during the shelter in place, and then show you a little bit of some of my books and prints, and then talk mostly about In Cahoots Residency, which is my current project that I'm working on. So since shelter in place happened at the end of March, I had to cancel residencies in April, and I had 3 residents that were going to be coming, and 2 of them reached out to me and said, let's do something through the mail. Instead of being in person for the month of April, let's do a mail art exchange during our residency. So the artists are Beth Fine, whose prints show here on the right, Gwen Parton, who's from Minneapolis, her prints are in the middle, and then mine are on the left. And so what we decided to do was to each make 5x7 prints or collages or pieces of art in a variable edition, keep one and send the other 2 to the other 2 artists. And so in the end, we each have a complete set of each print that was done each week. And I'm just going to call them prints, even though they're kind of collages or drawings or whatnot, but they all have some sort of print component. Let me see if I can get my thing to go forward. Okay, so Gwen Parton was making these images with some woven paper, and Beth Fine was making these images with some collage, and then also this really interesting form. It's like almost, I call it like an eye or maybe a keyhole. And what was fun is as we went along, we started to influence each other. So once a week we would receive these prints in the mail, have a Zoom meeting, decide maybe some directions for the next set of prints, and then go from there. And so what was fun is this is my print in week 2, and I was like, ooh, Gwen used some weaving and Beth used this eye shape. I'm going to incorporate those in my image. And you could really start to see the conversation that was happening visually between the prints. These are a couple more of the prints that I did in response to what was being sent to me. So it was a great way to stay active in the studio. It was truly the only thing I was doing in the studio. Otherwise, I was hosting family, doing so many dishes, as you all know and love, and working on some like construction projects, but not getting much artwork done. So these are just some of the images inspired. And this was the last, oh, this is a little blurry, but this is the last set of 3 variable edition that I did. And then the set has now grown. We've done this for 5 weeks. The set grew to 15 prints, and we decided we needed a 16th. And so what we're doing for the final print is Beth started and sent a variable edition of 3. I'm adding to those prints themselves, sending them on to Gwen, and then Gwen is going to complete them. So then we'll have a set of 16, which we thought would look good 4x4 presented on the wall. So this is like the set that we made so far. And we're planning to bind them into a book when Gwen and Beth can get here for a residency next year. I also have become sort of, I don't know whether inspired is the right word, but Beth actually last week on our phone call talked about people not staying 6 feet apart on the street and wanting to like get some kind of stencil or do something with the 6 feet. And that sort of stuck in my mind. So I went out and played with the wood type and made this 6 foot long book that says, "Stay 6 feet apart, cover your smile. My darling, it's all in the eyes." Which is so interesting how expression has sort of changed to be so much about the eyes when everyone's wearing masks. So it's 72 inches long. I think 72 inches is so inspiring that it can break down into 4 times 18. It can break it down into 8 times 9. It's kind of cool mathematically. So you may know some of the books that I've done. These are a couple of them just to kind of introduce myself as a book artist. I do limited edition books on the letterpress. A lot of times using abstraction, using mapping, infographics to communicate.
Johnson voted to subpoena documents.
Oh, come on.
Oh, I thought that was a question. Okay, so this is called Pathways. It comes in a glass box about interior pathways, emotions. And then I wanted to talk, since this is a group of print enthusiasts, I just wanted to talk about using type in prints and broadsides. So this is a folded form I did for an exchange with the Codex Foundation. The theme was mapping, so it actually really fit my work very well. It was an easy theme for me. So I took this old map of like a compass rose, or with some compass roses on it, and then used polymer plates to kind of add this small text within the map, and then this ring of text in the middle. It says, "A path of constant bearing on designated lines of course." But I do try to use handset type whenever possible, whenever time allows. And this is a exchange print for the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. I think the theme was something about the earth. And I was inspired by these photographs I had taken at Yellowstone of the, I don't remember, the calcification kind of, I'm not going to speak very clearly about the geology of it, but anyway, these beautiful places in Yellowstone. And I wanted the type to kind of nestle within the layers. And so I used a stencil and handset wood type to kind of put the type within the print so that it kind of appears to be coming out of the earth. So this is pressure printing with the sort of gray tones, and then on the right is the light blue is linoleum. I had the honor of coming to Hamilton. I think it might have been 3 years ago now. I don't know what year that was, Steph.
Yeah, 2017.
2017, okay. And so I'm part of a collective called Shift Lab, and Steph will put the link to that website in the chat if you're interested. 5 women artists, and we all work with books and prints in some way or another. And 3 of us, Denise Bookwalter, Sarah Bryant, and I had the honor to come and work for a week in the Hamilton studios. And we became enamored with the split letters in the collection. So this S down here isn't stenciled out. It actually exists as half an S. And we just loved these letters that just kind of became forms. They were no longer letters. And so this is a 2-page book that the pages are printed on both sides. The center shows the sort of half rounds of wood before they're made into letters, and we were just so thrilled by those and so excited that we could use them to print just like the raw wood. And then this little red form is half of a C that we just repeated twice, and then it becomes sort of an O. I think of this as almost like a bug or something too, like a little bug with wings. And just playing with the letter forms, overlapping shapes and colors, responding to the colors we saw around us in Hamilton, the gray cement floors, the bright red door that you could see from the print studio. And so it's just 2 pages, but the way that we folded it, it became more layered and more exciting than just 2 pages folded together. It's an edition, I think, of maybe 20. I can't remember. Yeah. And so it was also fun that we're a collective of 5, but it was also really fun, this sort of idea of 3 of us can do a project if the other 2 can't make it, or 2 of us can do a project, or this idea of like Shift Lab can be 5, but it can also be smaller amounts of us working together. So I made these linoleum blocks in response to murmurations of starlings. So watching videos of murmurations of starlings swooping in the air, I made drawings and then translated them into linoleum. And I was sort of obsessed with linoleum and still am. I've been for a couple years because I got a donation of just rolls of linoleum from a neighbor who had excess of linoleum from an architectural drafting table project he had done. It was sort of the surface of the tables. He had all this leftover linoleum. So why not use a free material? So I was using linoleum because it was free, and then also just this way that letterpress overlaps in the transparency of the ink is always really inspiring to me. So taking these forms of the murmurations of starlings and then thinking typographically about what these murmurations of starlings would look like. So at the time I was doing a residency in Basel called Basel Printmaking, which I highly recommend if people haven't heard of it. They have an incredible collection of type there. So this was handset type with both wood letters and some metal type, all in this great sans serif font that is, as far as I know, doesn't exist in the US. I haven't found something similar here. But hand setting the type into these sort of swoops and then combining the type and these linoleum forms into these murmurations. So then I didn't want to stop using these forms, and I was trying to think, how can I make this into a book? I was not really interested in making a book about birds, so I thought, what else could I make a book about? And I thought that these swooping forms really reminded me of stories, and when you're telling a story, like really spinning a yarn, it kind of swoops through the air towards the person listening. And then that made me think of 1001 Nights and Scheherazade telling one story after another and sort of these overlapping tales. And I thought that these swooping forms could represent these stories. So this is a page from a book called Meanwhile, and it uses now polymer versions of that typography of the sort of swooping letters. And then I drew these shapes on the Wacom tablet and then filled them with type blocks so that the type could also exist as these kind of organic shapes on the page. So this is what the book looks like when it's all bound together. And this print, I believe, was accepted into the Hamilton, what's the name of the fantastic show you have every year?
Impressions.
Yes, First Impressions. So anyway, and I was supposed to send it, but I think the show is now existing as a online version, right?
We'll have a real one. You'll get an email.
Okay. I'll get it. But anyway, this was the print that was accepted into that. And here's another spread from that book. The little type cluster reads, "In years and ages gone before." So I got really into the language of Sir Richard Burton, who did this translation of 1001 Nights, marveling over adventure, calamity, and ruin. I mean, every single word is just like super dramatic. So it's pretty fun to play with the language. So in this case, I didn't do any of the writing in this book. I usually include my own poetry, but I couldn't compete with Burton's translation. So I just used his words and rearranged them on the page. Said he, "All is thine without measure or account." So not every page has one of those larger type clusters. Another book called Locusts kind of leads me into talking about the residency. So this book comes in a clamshell box and is an accordion with a small pamphlet at each end. And it actually, I think this book actually might measure 6 feet when it's opened as well, because it's as big as my wingspan. It's about moving from California to Rhode Island, where I went back and lived for a year. I'm actually from Rhode Island. Then I came scurrying back out west, but I was there for a year. And I wanted it to be my arm's length because I felt like I was in both places, one hand in each place. But I wanted to show it to you mostly because of the typography. I use these little plus marks on the page to indicate location, so like locating myself in place and time. And so I've been using these plus marks in books for years as kind of a marker of either significant events or location. And in this case, I wanted to also use them typographically. So I made these little plus marks of some of the words from the poem that I had wrote for the book. So a cloak of the known, wondrous innumerable comforts, knowing yet yearning. And I exist in the space between. And of course, you all know the beauty of letterpress, so it's fun to take pictures in raking light of these printed images, printed text. And the book ends envisioning where happiness could be. I was really yearning for more happiness than I was feeling at the time. And so that leads me to starting the residency, which is definitely happy. So after living in Oakland for 15 years, I had been working for Julie Chen for a few of those years in her studio. I should note here, since Barb Tettenbaum is on the call, that I learned most of what I know about letterpress from Barb Tettenbaum at Oregon College of Art and Craft. Thank you, Barb. And it has stayed with me ever since, the passion that she instilled in me in handset type. And so I was teaching in Oakland, working a little bit for Julie, and really looking for what to do next in my career. Was I going to go into full-time teaching? Jobs were not to be found. Or was I going to do something else? And so I decided that I was going to do something else. And what I wanted to do was combine my love of printing, my love of hosting people, and my love of teaching into one thing, one project, and that would be a residency. So I found a piece of property in Petaluma, California. This is when I first bought the place. On the left is the barn that I transformed into a studio. There's two little white guest houses in the back, and then the main gray house you can see on the right. So from out in the field, it's almost a 4-acre piece of property, and from out in the field, it just looked like a ramshackle group of barns, and I was like, perfect. Most people who came admitted to me later that they were like, oh dear, what has she done? Because all these barns leaked, nothing was insulated, but the spaces existed, and I just set about renovating them. So 2 of the barns were connected by this leaky hallway in between, and I hired a contractor to help me fix the leaky roof. And what he did was he transformed the 2 barns into one by linking the 2 peaks of the roofs with this one larger roof. So the old leaky hallway used to be right here in the middle where the big square window is. And he transformed the space into one, and then clad it in red, because all barns need to be red. And then there was a rainbow. So then the rainbow comes out, the rainbow of happiness. So here's me looking like a fashion statement on a cold day, looking at the leaky roof, which I could touch if I just reached out my hand. And then 9 months later, here's me standing in the now bright middle section of the barn. So the outside wall of one barn is here on the left, and then the red outside wall of the other barn is there on the right. So when I bought it, it looked like this, filled with tools and old junk. And now it is a meeting table in the middle of a meeting space in the middle of the barn. So the barn itself, in so doing, we added some clear story windows up here at the top of the barn, which made a huge difference in adding natural light in there. It still looks like an old barn from the outside, which I actually really love. And then when you get in, it's been transformed into a printmaking studio. So the front room has a tackage etching press, and then the meeting table from the last picture. So I'm going to go through each studio and show you some people working in there, some of the artists that have come. So at the residency, we host 3 artists at a time. There are 3 guest houses. I built another one in the middle of the barn, a little apartment in there. So 3 artists come and usually work independently. People can sign up for a mentorship with me, either just, casual conversation, an hour a day, or actual instruction. Most people, the majority of people, come and just work on independent projects. I also really encourage collaboration. So I want people to sign up in groups, or at least have a collaborative spirit while they're here. Sharing ideas, just having conversations is all part of collaboration. So this is Allie Norman. She came from Florida, and she makes these really beautiful shaped intaglio plates using a jeweler's saw, and really, really intricate drawing on the plates. These are the 2 that she made during her 2 weeks, I think she was here at the residency last spring. This is Kathy Warner printing with really large laser cut wood pieces that she's relief printing on the tack etching press. These are a few of them on the wall. She's been my most dedicated resident. She's come to 2 residencies and then also has come up for day printing. She lives about half an hour away, so between sessions she'll come up and print for the day. Because my press is just a little bit bigger than hers, and she's been really into working large. This is Abby Birmingham, who's on the call today. She has come twice to a residency. This is last year, working on a book project using relief. I think she was inking up pieces of tag board for these plates, and then she made a beautiful book that folds out. It's based on the Keith Smith border book. So in the end, what was an 8-inch by 8-inch book folds out into a much larger image. This is Cami York. She was one of the grant winners last year. I do award, this year I think there'll be 8 full grants for people to come. Cami was one of the award winners last year. She made these really beautiful intaglio plates with chincole and some a la poupée, and also some just hand stamping of some images on them as well. So in the back, there's the letterpress barn. It was the old horse barn. And I think as a young child, I went to a barn that somebody had turned into like a party barn, and I've been thrilled by barns ever since. So the 2 horse stalls back here now house the 2 Vandercooks, because Vandercooks are the size of horses. So it makes perfect sense. And so the universal one that I've had for 15 or 20 years is on the left in that horse stall. And these gates do still close, and I joke that I will close people in until their addition is done, but never actually done that. And then on the right is a new Universal 3, new to me, Universal 3 that I bought from Mendocino, which luckily was pretty close by and had moved in right before I opened. It's an automated press with a tower and a frisket for automated printing. So some of the people who have worked in letterpress, this is Nick Schick, who came from Canada and did these really beautiful rainbow rolls on the letterpress, kind of creating a spectrum, and he folded them into a book that changes color as you read. And this was actually a little video I took, and the sunlight was sort of dappling on this book and making it look magical. This is just the still shot of it. Diane Jacobs came from Portland and did some wood engravings and also a big intaglio. She was printing the wood engraving on the letterpress. Nancy Lober came from New York, and she makes these really fantastic wood blocks of portraits, and the eyes just kill me every time. They're so expressive. So multiple blocks, sometimes reduction, but multiple block woodcuts that she prints on the letterpress. And then I do have a really fantastic collection of wood type collected over the years. Started with these 14 drawers that I bought in Portland, Oregon when I lived there. I was able to buy this wood type by the pound, so it was 10 cents a pound, so quite a deal. So I thought this was a pretty nice collection. It's really lovely, complete alphabets And then my sweet friend Jan Baker had been collecting wood type. She worked at RISD as a graphic design professor, and I had known her for years. And she had been collecting wood type to use in her retirement, and sadly she got ill and didn't make it to her retirement. And she called me up one day and said she wanted to give me her wood type collection, so for the residency to use. So this is her little abecedarian obituary that hangs on the outside of the type cabinet. And she had, it was like 10 huge boxes of type. She lives in Rhode Island and my dad lives close by. My dad went and packed up all the type for me. And so I received these 10 boxes of type in the mail, and it makes me think of Jan all the time. And it's used by residents pretty much weekly. So this is 43 line, something that she called Italian type. It's a little bit thicker than type high, so it can only be used on the press with the adjustable bed. Some other really, really interesting fonts in the collection. Some big numbers. Of course, a drawer of the mishmash and the ampersands and the exclamation points. And also Lori Whitehill, a dear friend, donated some of her wood type. Here she is printing on the press during a wood type workshop. And she donated some of her wood type that she'd been collecting, and she's still alive and well and comes to the residency often. So that was a very sweet gift. And then some larger letters. Marie Dern said, "Hey, you need type? I've got type." And Marie Dern lives in Marin, close by here in California. And she had a box of just mismatched large numbers and letters that I put on end, just like Hamilton, so that they can look like books. But it's a totally incomplete set, but they're super fun to play with. So I should note that the cabinet that all this type is in is kind of interesting. It's an old wardrobe. I inherited so much junk when I bought this property, and I didn't want the owner to clean out the junk because there was actually fantastic treasures amidst the junk. So one of the things was this old wardrobe, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I decided to make it into a wood type cabinet because all of the Hamilton cabinets are very expensive, so I decided to make one myself. So it has all these little wooden trays held up by these metal brackets that are just screwed into the side. And I have them labeled with a label maker. And so they are just pieces of thin masonite with little 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square pieces of wood glued down. And Erin Fong, one of the printers here in Emeryville, who might be on this call, helped me glue all these together as her work-study job to pay for half of her residency. And she's a bookmaker and a box maker, so man, were these trays perfect. So little pieces of wood around the edges to hold them all together. So in all, I think I have about 64 trays and room for a little bit more trays to add, but it made for a great cabinet, and I was able to put all that type away in one spot, which is great. So now for some of the artists who have worked with the wood type, this is Beth Fine, who's on the call. She was working here with some magnet made type high on the polymer bases, doing some relief printing. She also did some really creative lockups with some of the larger numbers, and then also a great lockup with a lot of the O's in the collection. The O's have seemed to be the most inspiring because they're shapes rather than letters, so they make for some great imagery. And this is 4 of the prints that Beth made during her residency last April. This is Erin Fong, who I mentioned. She might be here on the call, I'm not sure. She is a printer from Emeryville, and she's doing this amazing project. Here she's working on the Universal 3. She's doing this amazing project called the Friendship Project. So she's interviewing people about how to be a good friend, and then also asking what their favorite color is and some other questions. And then she makes a broadside based on some of their friendship advice. So don't be afraid to kvetch, be your own best friend, call, text, write, communication is key. So it's really amazing how when they're hung on the wall, they look like this beautiful spectrum. At the same time that Erin was here, Adrienne Miller came for a residency. I know Adrienne's on the call. Woo, woo. So these are she was just here for a week, and she just created so many prints made from some scraps of older prints or proofs from older prints, and just made all these collages and then added some more relief printing to them, as well as some trace monotype, I think. So here's one of them. So just amazing what you can do with these prints that are, you know, left over from past projects. It's just beautiful. And here, sometimes I just have superstar groupings of people at the residency. So here's Cami York, who I showed you her intaglios, Adrienne Miller in the middle, and Erin Fong and me on the right, in front of Erin's whole wall of prints. I think she might be made an addition of, I think she made 45 prints during the week, all in an edition of 10 or something. Another artist, Alex Chappelle, has been here twice. She comes, she's come both times in January. These are some of her proofs on the wall, and she didn't realize that it's spelled work. It also spells dork, but in this case, she was holding up a W. And she just played with the wood type in really creative ways. Here, she was using it as words, less thinking, more inking. But also just using the O's and the U's to create these shapes and overlap them. Here it's just one of her proofs on the table. She's telling me about it. And she also played around with the dingbat collection. I bought a lot of dingbats from Paul Livingston, who was a printer in Portland, Oregon, who passed away in the 90s. And I bought his whole type collection, including these wonderful dingbats. I think they're called Dainty Borders. Ingrid Ankerson from Michigan also played around with the dingbats, did a lot of wonderful type experiments with multiple colors and moving the dingbats just in really subtle ways to create these beautiful compositions. And also on the letterpress, Melissa Chan from LA came last September, and she became inspired by all the spiders in the barn. Not everyone's quite as inspired by them, but there's lots of spiders because it's still a barn. And so she just made these paper cuts of spider webs, printed them as pressure prints. There's Melissa. And then also as cyanotypes. So I've had so many artists arrive here and suddenly need to order cyanotype supplies because it's so sunny and you just want to use the resources. Because we are in cahoots, I also encourage collaboration. So here's two fantastic collaborators who are on the call today, Kate Laster on the left and Steph Kudish on the right. And they came in March. They were part of the quarantine crew during their residency here. The shelter in place started and they ended up staying an extra week and sheltering with us. They were doing a project about some chicken farmers in Petaluma. So they were inspired by the actual history of the place. So some Jewish chicken farmers. They did a lot of screen print. Steph exposed her screens out in the sun. Kate did a lot of relief printing. And then they installed their book and work out in the writing studio, which I'll show you in a minute. But here they are on the last work share. Also, Ariel Hansen-Strong on the right and Adam Donegan on the left came and did a collaboration for a week. Here they are doing paste paper out in the sun and working on their book, which ended up being a kind of a pyramid shape. There's a book bindery. So there's a wing of the barn that I renovated into the bindery space. And behind the glass wall on the left is my personal space. So that's the most cluttered space in the barn, of course. But it made a really nice light space. This barn was, it had no windows and a leaky roof. And I had windows installed and it just sort of transformed the space. So in the bindery, here are two artists working. Last July was like a huge book arts month. Anthea Black on the right works at CCA, and Karen Zimmerman on the left. They were working together in the bindery. Karen making a half clamshell box. And a recent book artist, Annegret Frauenlob from Germany was here for 3 weeks, also during the shelter in place with Kate and Steph. And she made a fantastic book using etchings on linoleum. So she took linoleum and used asphaltum and other blocking, even masking tape to block out the etch, which was actually lye. People say it's the equivalent of Drano. So she etched the surface of the linoleum and then printed them relief on the letterpress. Really impressive book. And she got an edition of 14 done, conceived, printed, and bound in 3 weeks. So pretty amazing. Here's a detail of some of the textures and colors and overlapping printing. Here are some of the books that have been done at the residency. Erin Mickelson in the front did a book with a prism and a flashlight. Sylvia Hugh Gonzalez in the back here with the palm fronds, it's a magic wallet, and then Edie Overturf on the right, and then you can see Allie Norman in the back. Heather Green came with piles of prints that she had already completed, and then bound a whole edition of 2 books that are in a set during her 2-week residency. And then the writing studio is the last little treasure on the land. This was an existing little shed. Pretty much, I didn't have to do anything to it. It already existed as a little separate space. And as soon as I walked into it, it just felt like a contemplative space, a perfect place for writing, for sketching. Some people go out there and do yoga in the morning. And here's Amanda Moore, who was a writing resident last summer. She ended up writing all about the calendula flowers, all of these orange flowers. She ended up doing poetry about calendula. And then it's a great installation space. I had a photographer, Sang-yeon Ju, who came from Korea, and she did an installation of photographs in the space. And Lauren Godding from Portland did some handmade paper. And did an installation in this space as well. So just to show you a couple of the cottages, I'm almost done. I want to leave room for questions and discussion. So there are 2 guest cottages that already existed on the property. This is the hen house with an antique stove. All of the guest quarters have their own kitchen and bathrooms, so people take care of their own meals. And I find it works out well to have a shared studio space and then separate housing, so people can really take time away when they need it, but then come back together for the creative time. This is the other cottage called Knotty Pine because of the walls. And it has a sweet little yellow floor, so I painted the door yellow as well to match the floor that was like that when I came, and I just freshened up, redone the paint on the floor, but kept it yellow. And then Seventh Heaven is the apartment that I built in the barn. When we raised the roof for the studio, it also raised the roof in this little room that was part of the barn. So we created a sleeping loft up above, and then a bathroom and a kitchen. There's also a double bed down on the ground, so people who are afraid of stairs can sleep on the ground level as well. So at the end of every residency session, we have a work share at the end of the 1-week sessions. Here, Lian Eng in the middle was our visiting artist, and Daniel Chiaccio on the left is showing his intaglio prints. Daniel is starting this wonderful co-op in Brattleboro, Vermont, and I gave Steph the link to share with you guys. It's called First Proof Press, and it's a cooperative print space that he just opened right before the shelter in place. So he's being really innovative in selling t-shirts and all kinds of things to get his business started during this weird time. And then at the end of the 2- and 4-week residencies, we have larger receptions with wine and cheese, and the public is invited. And so it's kind of more of a party atmosphere. They're every Saturday afternoon at the end of every longer session. And here, Catherine Maxwell is sharing her prints. So the artists have a chance to just introduce what they did. It's mostly just kind of a social time to meet people, but they also have a time to talk about their work. And we have horses grazing on the property. They are my beloved lawnmowers because otherwise I'd never be able to keep the grass down. So they come and eat it, and they're beautiful. They belong to my neighbors, but they come and graze on the field and actually live here for about 8 months a year. And then they go back to the barn in the winter, back to their own barn in the winter. So this is Comet. The horses bring great happiness. So this is Jen McKnight, who was a resident last summer, and she just loved feeding carrots to the horses. This is her delightful response. This is Louis the horse showing us his beautiful smile. And then we have emus next door. It's truly the country. We have cows, emus, goats, horses, the occasional fox, some feral cats, a skunk, etc. So these fantastic characters live next door, these little emus. And we are having a fundraiser this summer. Because of all the grants I give out, I need to do some fundraising to help to support that. So we're actually going to have an online print auction. So I gave Steph a link. If anyone's interested in donating a print, I would be so grateful. And all of the funds go to support artists coming to the programs, support the grant program. I think that is it. Yeah, so here's my info at the end, and then Steph also sent you some links, and I'm on Instagram. So I want to open it up to some chatting. So thanks everybody for listening to my presentation. Any questions or chats that you want to have?
Macy, you're in Petaluma.
Yeah.
And I didn't see any pictures of a vineyard. Isn't that required if you own property in Petaluma?
Well, when I first moved in, I was like, I want to plant grapes. And everyone told me I was a stupid city person for saying that. And I was like, but I do want to plant grapes. There's vineyards down the road, but you can't see them from my property. It's Sonoma County, but not everybody has vines.
You can always go up to Coppola's, right? It's down the road.
Yeah, Coppola's is right down the road, yeah. So Sonoma's about 20, 25 minutes away. So the actual wine country, yeah.
There was an interesting question from Erin. She said, what type of material do you use for pressure printing? Which I'll admit I'm curious as well.
I use either glue, string, tape. Does she want to know what I make the plate out of or what I print on? Don't know.
Erin, do you want to speak up? She just said, what type of material do you use for pressure printing?
Oh,
so
okay.
I don't know if maybe it's the material you actually use as the backing or.
Yeah, so I usually start with a piece of text weight paper and then build up the collage with different weights of paper, string, tape, anything textured, and then print. My favorite paper to print on is Mohawk Superfine. I have tried to find other papers, but nothing really compares because it has such even pulp that it really mirrors the original collage as accurately as anything. If you print on any sort of laid line papers, it's going to really accentuate the laid lines, which can be a look that you want, but it also can distract from your image if that's something that you don't want. So, yeah. Anyone else? People can just unmute and jump in. I'm so curious to see who's here.
What did she use for holdout when she used lye on the linoleum?
Oh, so she used, oh gosh, we were trying to find it and all the drugstores were like, why do you want that? It was sodium carbonate, I want to say.
But I'm saying, what do you use for holdout? Is it wax? Is it?
Oh, she used, sometimes she used masking tape or asphaltum, anything you'd use on a copper plate, basically.
Okay.
So I think on some of them, she put hard ground on it and then messed with the surface so that wherever the linoleum is exposed is where it etches in, and whatever you want to keep, you like protect somehow. It was pretty fascinating because she was from Germany, and when she arrived, she was like, I want to etch on linoleum. And I was like, oh, you know, it must be lost in translation. She must mean carve on linoleum, you know. And then she was like asking me where to get this sodium carbonate stuff. And I was like, oh, she really does mean etching on linoleum. So pretty awesome. So you have to really tape around the edges and put shelf paper on the back and really protect everything that you don't want to get etched in the lye. Cool.
Hey, Macy, I have a question.
Is that Kate that's talking? No.
Oh, Krista, that's fine.
Hi. Okay.
Hey, I was just curious, like the transformation of your property is like incredible. And I guess I was just curious how like the layout is just so fluid and how you sort of determined that. Like, were you sketching out the barn? Did you like rely on your contractor, or was it just basically the fact that you've worked in other letterpress studios that you're like, oh, this space is like how this is going to make sense?
I mean, it really came about very organically. I just knew that I wanted the horse barn to be the letterpress space, but everything else was sort of transformed as we went. There was one point that my contractor's like, okay, well, where do you want the windows? And I was like, I guess over there. Like, I just suddenly was like, okay, I get to play an architect, you know, because it was like just kind of figuring it out as you went. But I felt like the most important thing was to respond to what was already there. Like, since there was a cool red wall, it's like, okay, what can we do to like accentuate that wall rather than covering it up or whatever. So it does really flow well, but I feel like that's the barn itself. Like, I just kind of cleaned it up, you know. I feel like the barn already kind of was meant for that, you know. Thanks for the question, though.
Besides, this is Ben. Besides construction stuff, like what's been the biggest challenge you've had in building the residency?
I think some unexpected septic issues were the biggest challenge. You know, like pipes that just broke, pipes that backed up. Like, for a while, it was just all about the plumbing. And I was like, oh my God, please stop. So I think owning a country property for the first time ever has been super challenging. Just like, how does a septic tank work? And, you know, how does the well work? And when the electricity goes out, there is no water because it's well water. And, you know, all of these sort of systems challenges were pretty tough. I feel like starting the business itself went pretty well, I think, because I had such a strong book and letterpress community to start with, and printmaking community, and the Bay Area is just full of print enthusiasts, so I feel like that was really helpful. I wasn't out, I mean, I'm only an hour from San Francisco, and so people were able to come up. I could get local residents to come up right away. Whereas other places that I was looking to buy property, it would have been a plane flight away for a lot of people. It would have been harder to get it up and running. So I'm just super thankful for my community to actually get the business up and running, the business end of things. But I'm still sort of trying to learn how to run a small business with the whole shutdown and trying to get a payroll protection plan loan. They're like, show us your payroll. And I'm like, I don't have a payroll. I have a checkbook, you know? So it's like trying to figure out, you know, oh, do I need to sign up for a payroll company? Or, you know, just I have a few part-time employees that I wanted to keep paying, and like to try to convince the powers that be that I was a legit business was a little tough, because I run my business like an artist. I run my business like it's a project, you know, instead of like a business with spreadsheets and stuff. So anyway, I think another challenge was probably the scheduling. Once people applied, I have this really complicated spreadsheet about how to schedule people when they want to come and on the equipment that they want to use, because I really try hard not to have like 3 people at a time all wanting to use letterpress. I try to like spread out so that there's a writer and an etcher and a letterpress person, so that people can really have their own area of the studio. So I think that that's been a little bit challenging to try to get all of that to line up on this sort of complicated color-coded spreadsheet, which is kind of fun in a way too, like a puzzle. So thanks for the question, Ben.
There's one online, somebody wants to know, what do you get out of the residency in terms of ideas and inspiration? And to clarify a bit, they said, meaning does each artist bring something that influences your work? Because they can see an influence of your work in some of their work. Maybe about that exchange. Yeah,
I think it is an exchange. And that was one interesting part about Shelter in Place, is I had the whole studio and it was empty and I could have been working, but the energy was gone, you know, like I really get a lot of creative energy about having people here working, and people come in, especially if they're only here for a week, they come in with so much energy and so many ideas and almost like all this pent up creativity, like blah, ready to go. And so I missed that a lot when during shelter in place. And so it was sort of harder to get myself working. I definitely get influenced. Like I'm starting to write down, like, you know, all the techniques that people bring in, like, wait, what do you do to make a trace monotype work perfectly? You know, I remember Adrian and Cami like had all these different ideas about the ink additives and how stiff the ink needs to be for trace monotype. And I remember Alex Chappelle came and added mag carb to the ink for stiffening it for letterpress. And I was like, what? Like I'd never done anything to letterpress inks before. Like I'd never added anything or messed with them. So just things like that definitely influence me. I don't use the ideas that I get from the residents often enough because I'm pretty busy running the residency itself, but I think that they're soaking in, they're like in there. So and in terms of me influencing them, I mean, I know at one point Beth Fine was laughing. She's like, "Hey, I think I'm using your colors," because I had one of my prints hanging on the wall. But I don't think it's like necessarily purposeful. You know, I just think it's sort of like the environment influences.
Hey, Macy, have you found that the quantity of making work that you've done has gone up or down with running the residency?
Especially the first year, it went way down because the residency was my creative project. Like that was sort of, it took all my creative energy. Hi, Meredith, by the way.
Hi.
Hey. And now I think it's a question of discipline. If I want to be in my studio every afternoon, the residents have no trouble with that. It's just me, like sometimes I'd just rather hang out with them than, you know, go off into my own studio. But I think I think compared to teaching, I have a lot more time for my own work than I used to. Yeah, if I just seize it and do it, I have more time. Yeah.
Macy, I'm curious, have you already begun your book about how you designed and created and built this residency?
No, but I've thought about it. I mean, I'm making another book right now in a collaboration with my dad, and I think I'd maybe rather be making a book about how the residency came about than this project that's been cooking for a couple of years in the back of my mind, because it is a creative act in itself to,
oh, yeah,
to transform a building and to make it into a business. And yeah, I feel like I tell a lot of the stories, but maybe I should write them down. So.
Yeah, it seems like you have a great set of stories about the people who, well, first of all, the space you found and how you transformed it, the people you've interacted with, and then what you've learned technically too, even though you were a very accomplished teacher, all these little details that you learned from everyone. It just seems like it has this ability to be a novel and a kind of technical book.
Right. That's really true. Yeah, and I mean, I didn't mention really out loud, but I think you all got the feeling that it's really about building community too. I'm like so touched by how many resident alumni are here, you know, on this call, and about how many keep in touch and come back, and all of that, and also about creating community in Petaluma, which is a pretty small town where I think that a lot of people stick to their own studios and haven't traditionally sort of interacted. And I'm trying to create a place where they can come and do that, you know, come to the receptions and come take workshops and sort of a gathering place for that. And that's super important. I feel like it was harder for me to build community in the city. And I feel like it's people have more time for community up in the country, and I'm really enjoying that. So helping to foster that has been cool. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Hey, Macy.
Hey, Taya, how are you?
You know, I'm wondering how you feel or what you're thinking about, like, you know, what's it going to look like later after you know, this weird period is over. Do you have any thoughts? I mean, I feel like we're all sort of struggling with what we knew before is going to be different after, and what are you envisioning for the after so far? I mean, as much as you can.
I know. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like working so hard to have, like, to build this, like, workshops and receptions and all this stuff. And it's like, well, can I still do that at all? And like, what does the new model look like? And what will quote unquote normal look like now? And yeah, I mean, I sort of gave me pause. So I have a deadline of June 1st for applying for residencies for 2021. And I'm just like, I'm really optimistic. But yesterday I was like, should I not even be doing that? Like, I don't, you know, am I just setting myself up for another puzzle of rescheduling and canceling and, you know, but
Macy, have you been in touch with the Alliance about that?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I know that the Alliance of Artist Communities has a huge thing on how residencies in the States are dealing with COVID-19.
Yeah, I can look more. I was really in touch with them in the beginning and saying, you know, what should I do? And they were like, you should consult your board. And I was like, I don't have a board.
Right.
You know, they're like, ask your board for help. And I was like, oh, you know, I'm a little bit unusual in that I'm not a nonprofit and I don't have a
Right.
board, and I also don't have a patron who's paying for everything. And, you know, so but I should look again, because I talked to them really early on when they were still like, no either.
Right.
So,
I'd encourage you to, especially because I think there are at least 10 not nonprofits that are dealing with this within the Alliance community. So they, at least Flannery, should be able to point you in the direction of, I don't know, those people, so that you can compare notes. We're too early on in that position to worry yet, but you aren't.
But it's, you know, it's tricky, and I feel so grateful that I had a good year under my belt before this hit, and before now I have to transform. You know, having that year sort of was like just like a bolster, a support of like, okay, this is what I want to do. This has been well received. Now what do I do? You know, so yeah. But we should talk on the phone too about what's to come, and yeah. It's tricky. I mean, the advantage of my setup is that people can live individually. So that's very you know, germ-free, your own kitchen, your own bathroom that I have sanitized before you get there, and then staying as separate as you want or need to in the studio. Usually people start off, I have my first, I had 3 residents back this weekend that were just friends, just coming for a couple days. And people, those friends started off with masks and then eventually took the masks off and just made sure that they stayed 6 feet apart, which sort of, it ends up being what happens. And now I have 1 resident here, another one arriving today. So it's just like starting back up slowly. And it's more of a retreat atmosphere. We're not having group, you know, we're not having group dinners. We're not having, sadly, as many, you know, sort of meetings and gatherings, but yet sitting outside in the sun and talking from a distance, you know, which is nice. So thanks for the question. Thanks everybody so much for coming.
Yeah, I was going to say we're at our hour. It's 1:04. And so I do want to say thank you so much, Macy. You are an inspiration both with your work and the community you've done. I follow you on Instagram, but being able to really see the work that's being created there and the people you're bringing together is really lovely. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me. This was awesome.
Yeah. And thank you for everyone who joined us. I'm so glad you guys came. It's a nice sunny day here in Wisconsin, so I'm hoping you're having some nice weather wherever you are. So yeah, I was gonna say thank you so much for coming today, and I hope you guys have a lovely holiday weekend. So yeah, thanks you, Macy.
Everybody. Bye. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Macy. That was awesome.
Thanks, Meredith. Gosh, so many fun names in the thing. I didn't even get to see who all the people who were here. So cool. Hi, Val.